I went on a blind date, never expected the millionaire CEO to fall in love with me. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never thought my life would turn upside down in just a few hours. It started like any normal day, the kind where everything feels safe and ordinary. I woke up, made my coffee, and scrolled through my phone while the sun peeked through the blinds. Nothing special, just the routine I had carefully built for myself. I worked hard, kept to myself mostly, and somehow managed to feel like I was in control of my life. But that morning, there was an odd tension in the air, something I couldn't name, a subtle weight pressing on my chest, almost like the world was quietly warning me. I ignored it, of course. I always ignored those little signs, thinking they were silly or my imagination. But I should have listened. I remember staring at my reflection in the mirror, brushing my hair back, trying to convince myself I looked fine, ready to take on the day. I had a meeting, nothing too big, but enough to feel nervous. I was about to leave when my phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize. "You're exactly who I need to meet today." I frowned, not creepy, but strange enough to make me pause. I typed back, "Who is this?" And the reply came almost instantly. "Someone who can change your life. Tonight." My heartbeat quickened, not out of fear, but curiosity. Who would say something like that? And why me? I shoved the phone in my bag and decided to ignore it for the time being, thinking maybe it was some random prank or spam. Little did I know, that message was the first thread in a chain that would unravel everything I thought I knew about life. The day went by normally, or at least it tried to. I worked, answered emails, smiled at co-workers, all the while feeling a strange pull in my stomach, a sense that something unusual was approaching. Hours felt both slow and fast at the same time. The clock ticked, and before I knew it, the sun had dipped low, spilling golden light. It across the city streets as I made my way to the little cafe where I was supposed to meet someone. I didn't even know who. My hands shook slightly as I walked, every shadow feeling like it was moving with me, every passerby a silent observer of the unknown story that was about to begin. I told myself it was just nerves, nothing more. But deep down, I knew this day wouldn't end like any other. Not tonight. When I arrived, I saw him immediately, waiting by the entrance. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed in a suit that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not on a random blind date. My first thought? How could someone like him exist in my real, normal world? His eyes met mine, and I felt that strange jolt that people talk about in movies, like the world had shifted just for that moment. I smiled nervously, unsure of what to say. He smiled back, and it wasn't the polite smile strangers give. It was like he knew something I didn't, like he already understood the storm that was about to hit my life. We sat down, and the conversation started cautiously. At first, polite, almost awkward. But then, there was a moment, a pause in time. He told me a story about his life, the challenges, the mistakes, the heartbreaks. I listened, captivated, feeling a mixture of awe and fear, because every word felt intimate, revealing, almost dangerous in the way it pulled me closer to him without any warning. I wanted to ask questions, but I also didn't want to break the fragile tension that was forming between us. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into something vast and unknown, and I had no choice but to step closer. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. He leaned in slightly, voice low, almost trembling, and said something I wasn't ready for. "I've never felt this way before, and I'm terrified of what it might mean." I froze. My heart was hammering in my chest. That simple, honest confession created a storm inside me. I wanted to run, to laugh nervously, to pretend this wasn't real. But every part of me knew it was. The intensity, the fear, the thrill, all blending into something I couldn't ignore. I realized in that moment that my life had changed. And yet, I had no idea how deep the change would go. We left the cafe together, walking side by side in silence. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement from a recent rain, and everything felt surreal. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to read his thoughts, his intentions, anything that could clue me in on what would happen next. There was a magnetism, a pull I had never experienced, drawing me towards someone I barely knew, but somehow trusted more than anyone in my life. And then, just when I thought I could anticipate the next moment, he stopped, turning to face me fully. "You have no idea how dangerous this is," he whispered, almost like a warning. My breath caught. Dangerous. What could possibly be dangerous about this? The truth hit me slowly, like a shadow creeping across the room. I wasn't just caught in a romance or a flirtation. I was stepping into a world completely different from anything I had ever imagined. A world of secrets, of power, of risk, where every choice could shift my life in unimaginable ways. And yet, despite the fear, despite the unknown, a part of me wanted to go further, to see how far this story would take me. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I nodded slowly, silently agreeing to continue, even though my mind screamed for caution. And that's how it began. The ordinary day that should have ended quietly transformed into the first chapter of the most unexpected, shocking, and life-altering journey I could have ever imagined. I had no idea that the night was just the beginning, that each step forward would unravel more surprises, more emotions, and more danger than I had ever encountered. I was stepping into a story that wasn't written yet. A story where every choice mattered, and where the line between love, fear, and betrayal blurred in ways I wasn't ready to face. And as I looked at him, standing there, confident, but hiding something, I couldn't help but ask myself silently, how far would I be willing to go? And what would I risk along the way? The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had stepped into someone else's life. My mind was buzzing, heart still tangled in the confusion and thrill of last night. I couldn't stop replaying every word, every glance, every touch. Small, fleeting moments that suddenly felt monumental. I wondered if he felt the same intensity, the same pull, or if it was just me imagining a story that didn't exist outside my head. I tried to convince myself to focus on work, on normal life, but the thought of him kept intruding, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Something told me I wouldn't be able to ignore it. Not now. Not ever. I went through my morning routine on autopilot, making coffee, staring out the window at the city that seemed suddenly smaller, more ordinary, and yet somehow heavier, like it was holding a secret just for me. I checked my phone a dozen times, hoping for a message, any sign that last night wasn't just a dream. And then it came, a single text that made my stomach lurch. "Meet me tonight. There's something I need to show you." No explanation, no warning, just those words. My hands shook as I typed back, "Why? What is it?" But there was no reply for a few minutes, and when it finally arrived, it simply said, "You'll see. Trust me." By the time evening came, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear, like I was walking a tightrope over a dark canyon. I dressed carefully, not wanting to look too eager, not wanting to seem vulnerable, yet secretly wanting him to notice everything I wore. I told myself over and over, "It's just a meeting, just a meeting." But my heart didn't believe in me. As I stepped out of my apartment, the city lights seemed sharper, shadows longer, every sound more intense. I could feel the anticipation building, a quiet storm of energy that made my pulse quicken. I tried to breathe normally, to act calm, but even as I hailed a cab, I knew calm was a lie. When I arrived, he was waiting, not in a cafe this time, not in a safe public space, but in an alley just off the main street, dimly lit and slightly hidden from view. I froze for a moment, my instincts screaming to leave, but curiosity and something deeper, something I couldn't name, kept me rooted. He smiled at me, that same magnetic smile, but this time there was something different in his eyes. Seriousness, urgency, a hint of fear. "You made it," he said, voice low. "Good. Follow me." I nodded, swallowing hard, trying not to show how nervous I really was. We walked in silence, the sounds of the city fading behind us, until we reached a small, nondescript building. He glanced at me, reading my hesitation. "I promise, you'll understand soon," he said. I wanted to ask questions, but the words caught in my throat. There was a strange weight in the air, a tension that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears as we stepped inside, and immediately, the room felt colder, darker, charged with a presence I couldn't name. Something was happening here, something that would change everything, and I felt both terrified and exhilarated. He led me to a small office, and for a moment, I didn't know where to look. There were papers stacked neatly, a single desk lamp illuminating an array of photographs, documents, and strange items I couldn't identify. He walked over to the desk and picked up a folder, sliding it toward me. "Everything you're about to see, it's real, and it's dangerous." My hands trembled as I reached for it, my curiosity overpowering my fear. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes widened. Names, faces, events, things that felt too immense to comprehend. He looked at me, waiting, and I realized that the world I had lived in, the ordinary life I had taken for granted, was nothing compared to what I was seeing now. And the truth was terrifying. I remember the moment I looked up at him, voice shaking, asking, "Why are you showing me this? Why me?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, eyes steady, as if measuring whether I was ready. "Because," he finally said, "you're the only one who can understand it, and you're the only one who can help. I didn't want to involve you, but I had no choice." I felt a cold rush of fear, panic threatening to take over. I wasn't trained for this. I wasn't brave. I was just me. And yet, there was a part of me, a tiny, defiant part, that wanted to rise to the challenge, that wanted to prove I could handle more than I ever thought possible. We stayed there for hours, poring over documents, discussing what we could do, and the more I learned, the heavier the weight became. Secrets that could ruin lives, truths that people would kill to hide, a world of danger that existed quietly beneath the normal streets I had walked every day. I felt my heart pounding, fear and adrenaline mixing in a way I hadn't felt since ever. And somewhere in the midst of it all, I realized something else. I was beginning to trust him. Not blindly, not foolishly, but completely, in a way that made me vulnerable and alive at the same time. And that trust terrified me more than the danger did. By the time we left the building, the sky was dark, and the streets were nearly empty. I felt exhausted, overwhelmed, but also strangely alive, as though I had glimpsed a part of reality that most people never see. He walked me back to my apartment, and the silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken words, questions, and the kind of tension that makes the air feel thick. At my door, I turned Ned to him, trying to put my thoughts into words, but I couldn't. I just whispered, "I don't know if I'm ready for this." He smiled softly, almost sadly, and said, "You're more ready than you think, and tonight was only the beginning." I closed my door behind me and leaned against it, trying to calm the storm inside my chest. My life felt like it had shifted on its axis, like the ground had disappeared beneath me, and I was dangling over a cliff. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, who I could trust, or how far I would be pulled into this strange, dangerous world. But one thing was certain. I couldn't go back to the life I had before. That life no longer existed. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew I wanted it to stay that way, even if it terrified me. And that's how the next chapter of my life began. Not with a choice, but with a step into the unknown, with my heart racing, my mind spinning, and my soul somehow aware that the journey ahead would be both the most frightening and the most unforgettable thing I would ever experience. I didn't know it yet, but everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and danger was about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. And just as I lay down that night, trying to sleep while my thoughts raced, I couldn't stop asking myself, silently, how far will I have to go before I truly understand what's happening? And will I survive the answers? The next few days were a blur, a strange mix of normal life and the secret world I had been pulled into. Every morning, I went to work, smiled at my co-workers, answered emails, and pretended like everything was ordinary. But beneath the surface, my mind was spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the documents, about the danger that had suddenly become real in my life. I felt like I was living two lives at once, one that everyone could see, and one that only I knew existed, full of secrets, tension, and the kind of fear that never leaves your chest. Every step felt heavier, every glance felt more loaded, and every sound made me jump, wondering if someone was following me, watching me, waiting for a single mistake. He called me that evening, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it, a seriousness that made my stomach twist. "Meet me," he said. "We need to move forward, and it's not safe to stay in one place." I nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I trusted him, even though my rational mind screamed that I shouldn't. My curiosity, my sense of adventure, and something deeper, something I didn't fully understand, kept pulling me in, despite the fear gnawing at me. I felt alive in a way I hadn't before, and that was both thrilling and terrifying. We met in the same alley, and he led me through a series of side streets, avoiding the main roads, until we reached an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The building looked abandoned, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls, but inside, it was a different world. There were maps pinned to the walls, computers running, papers scattered everywhere, and people moving quietly, with purpose. I realized that this wasn't just about the information he had shown me. It was about action, about something bigger than either of us. I felt my pulse quicken, fear and excitement mixing into a potent cocktail that made my hands shake. I wanted to run, to scream, to hide, but instead, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. He guided me to a small room in the back, where he explained what we were dealing with. It was worse than I could have imagined. Secrets that powerful people would do anything to keep hidden. Corruption that reached places I didn't want to think about. And danger that wasn't just abstract, but immediate. I felt my chest tighten, realizing that I had been pulled into a world where mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they could be deadly. And yet, I couldn't look away. The truth, raw and exposed, had a hold on me. I wanted to understand it, to see it, even though part of me wanted to retreat, to escape to my small, safe apartment and pretend none of this existed. As the night went on, he explained more, showing me connections, evidence, and people who were involved. I could feel my mind expanding, taking in the enormity of what I was seeing, but also my heart pounding with the tension, the danger, and the weight of responsibility. At one point, I looked up at him, voice barely above a whisper. Why me? Why am I here? He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, I saw vulnerability in him, a crack in the armor he always wore. Because, he said softly, you see the world differently. You notice what others ignore, and I trust you to do what needs to be done. His words hit me harder than anything else. Trust, responsibility, danger, all wrapped into one, and all pointing at me, like I had no choice but to step into it. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside the door, fast, urgent, and deliberate. My heart leapt into my throat. He motioned for me to stay quiet, and we moved to a corner, blending into the shadows. The footsteps came closer, then paused. I could hear muffled voices, the click of a lock turning, and the faint sound of someone breathing. I gripped his arm, my nails digging into his sleeve, terrified, yet somehow exhilarated. The room seemed to shrink, every shadow and sound amplified, and I realized in that moment that nothing would ever be the same. Fear and adrenaline coursed through me, sharp and intoxicating. After what felt like hours, the voices faded, and we exhaled in relief. But the tension didn't leave. He turned to me, eyes serious. You see why this is dangerous now. Every step we take is watched. Every move can be traced. And mistakes aren't forgiven. I nodded, my throat dry, heart still racing. I knew he was right, and I knew that I had already crossed a line I couldn't uncross. My life was no longer my own in the way it had been. It belonged to this story, to this mission, and to the unknown paths ahead that I could neither predict nor control. And yet, deep inside, a spark of determination lit up, fierce and unyielding. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't hide. Not now. As we left the warehouse and walked through the dark streets, he kept glancing over his shoulder, cautious, alert. I felt the weight of the city pressing down on us, the quiet danger hidden in plain sight, and it made every sense in me sharp and alive. I realized how fragile life was, how quickly everything familiar could vanish, and how easy it was to be swept into something bigger than yourself. And yet, I also felt a strange exhilaration, a sense that I was part of something that mattered, that was real, that was dangerous in a way that made me feel more awake than I had ever felt before. Fear and excitement intertwined, impossible to separate, making every heartbeat count. When we finally paused at a quiet street corner, he looked at me, face shadowed by the dim streetlights. Tomorrow, we move again. More people, more information. It's going to get harder, faster, and riskier. Are you ready for that? I swallowed hard, thinking of everything we had already faced, everything I had already seen, and even though my body shook, even though my mind screamed in protest, I nodded. I am, I whispered, barely believing the words myself. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer just a girl named Alec Rose, living a normal life. I was something else now, someone caught in a story that demanded courage, sharpness, and resilience. Someone who had already stepped into a dangerous, thrilling, and unforgettable journey. And there was no turning back. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness I couldn't shake. My mind kept replaying every detail from the night before. The warehouse, the documents, the strangers moving quietly with purpose. Even the ordinary sounds of my apartment felt different, sharper, somehow charged with the knowledge that my life had changed forever. I tried to tell myself to focus on normal things, work, errands, people I could control. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadows, felt the tension, heard the low hum of danger lurking just beyond the edges of my reality. I realized then that there was no escaping this story. Not now, not ever. By mid-morning, I got a call. It was him. His voice was calm, but there was an edge, a kind of urgency that made my chest tighten. "Meet me tonight," he said. I nodded, not trusting my words to convey everything I felt. Fear, anticipation, a strange pull I didn't understand. "Where?" I asked. "Same place," he replied. "But be ready. It's not going to be easy." Even before I hung up, a chill ran down my spine. Whatever he was leading me into, it wasn't safe. And yet, I felt an odd thrill, a spark of determination that kept me moving forward, despite the uncertainty gnawing at my mind. That evening, I made my way to the alley, the city around me quiet, the streets nearly empty. Shadows stretched across the pavement, and every sound, the distant hum of a car, the flutter of a flag in the wind, felt amplified. My heartbeat was loud in my ears, and I could feel my palms growing sweaty as I approached the familiar figure waiting for me. He didn't smile this time. His face was serious, almost grim, and I knew immediately that tonight would be different. He gestured for me to follow, and together we moved through the city, slipping through side streets, alleys, and hidden paths I had never noticed before. It was like walking through a parallel world, one that existed in plain sight, but was hidden from ordinary eyes. We arrived at an old building, unremarkable from the outside, but buzzing with quiet energy inside. People moved with precision, urgency, and purpose. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, a mixture of fear, excitement, and something I couldn't name. He guided me to a back room where more documents, screens, and maps were hung. He explained what we were facing: corruption, secrets, and danger that reached far beyond the city streets I thought I knew. I could feel my chest tighten, my mind struggling to absorb the enormity of it all. And yet, despite the fear, I couldn't look away. Every piece of information, every hidden truth, drew me deeper into a story I didn't yet understand, but couldn't escape. Hours passed as we worked. He showed me connections, evidence, and details that were almost too overwhelming to process. My hands shook, my heart raced, and yet, through it all, a strange clarity emerged. I realized I was part of something bigger than myself, something that demanded courage, focus, and resilience. And somehow, I trusted him, more than I had ever trusted anyone before. I couldn't explain it. There was danger, yes, but there was also truth. And truth had a weight, a pull that made it impossible to turn away. Just as I began to feel a small sense of control, the room went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses down on your chest and makes your ears ring. Then, footsteps. Slow at first, deliberate, and then closer, faster. My stomach flipped. He motioned for me to stay behind a stack of crates, blending into the shadows. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they would hear it. The door creaked open, and 2 men entered. They didn't speak, but their presence alone carried threat, danger, and an invisible warning. One wrong move, and everything could collapse. I held my breath, trying not to move, trying not to be noticed, feeling every second stretch into an eternity. They looked around, their eyes scanning the room, stopping occasionally at the computers, at the stacks of papers. I could feel the tension in him too, as he crouched beside me, silent and alert. I wanted to run, to scream, to do something, anything, but I couldn't. My body refused to obey. Fear had root. Teared me in place. I could hear my own thoughts racing. What happens if they find us? What happens if I make a mistake? And in that instant, I realized that this was what it meant to be part of this world. Not safe, not predictable, not controllable, but alive in a way I had never experienced before. After what felt like hours, the men left, moving as silently as they had arrived. We exhaled, the tension lifting just enough for me to realize how close we had come to disaster. He turned to me, eyes dark but calm. "You see now," he said softly, "why this is dangerous. Every step matters. Every choice can cost lives." I nodded, my throat tight, trying to speak, but unable to. My mind was spinning, my body trembling, but despite it all, a strange sense of determination settled over me. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I had already stepped too far into the story, and somehow I knew that walking away was no longer an option. We left the building quietly, slipping back through the city streets, shadows following our every move. I felt the adrenaline fade slowly, replaced by a heavier, more insistent weight. The realization that the danger was constant, ever present, and that nothing would ever feel safe again. Yet, in that same moment, I also felt something else. A fierce, undeniable spark of courage. A fire that told me I could survive this, that I could face whatever came next. And when he finally paused at a quiet street corner, turning to look at me, I knew one thing for certain. The story wasn't just about him, or the documents, or the secrets. It was about me, about who I would become in the face of fear, danger, and uncertainty. I walked home that night, alone in the darkness, my mind racing, my chest heavy, and yet, strangely, my heart full. I realized that life, as I had known it, no longer existed. Every step, every decision, every moment of trust and fear had changed me in ways I couldn't yet name. I was Nekin, no longer just Alec Rose, a girl with a quiet, ordinary life. I was part of a story that demanded courage, resilience, and sacrifice. And as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, feeling the familiar click of my door closing behind me, I knew one thing. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't go back. And the world I had stepped into, dangerous, thrilling, and unpredictable, was only beginning to reveal itself. The following morning felt heavier than any I had experienced before. My sleep had been shallow, full of dreams that blurred reality and fear. Every noise in my apartment startled me. Every shadow seemed alive. Even the sunlight streaming through my blinds felt different, as if it was revealing a world I had never noticed. A world that had always existed, but had somehow remained hidden until now. I knew, deep down, that nothing about my life would ever be ordinary again. The events I had stepped into were bigger than I could have imagined, and the weight of them pressed on me relentlessly. I got the text while I was still in bed, my heart jumping into my throat. Meet me tonight. It's urgent. Don't tell anyone. No explanation, just those words, sharp and unyielding. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. Urgent. I had no choice but to go. Every instinct screamed for me to stay safe, to hide, to pretend this wasn't happening. But my curiosity, my trust, and some deep, reckless part of me refused to let me ignore it. This story had me now, and I was no longer capable of walking away. When evening came, the city had transformed. The streets seemed emptier, quieter, as if they too were holding their breath. I met him in our usual alley, but this time there was no warmth, no casual smile. His eyes were intense, scanning the surroundings as if danger lurked around every corner. He nodded toward me, and we moved together through the side streets, keeping to the shadows. My pulse hammered in my ears, every sense alert, every instinct screaming that tonight was different, that something monumental was about to unfold. We arrived at an abandoned building I had never seen before, its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and rust, and the low hum of distant voices reminded me that we were not alone. He led me to a small room in the back, and my stomach sank at the sight. There were files, photos, and maps spread across the table, more than ever before, and the tension in the room was almost suffocating. "This is it," he said quietly. "Everything comes to a head tonight. You need to be ready for what you're about to see." I swallowed hard, a mixture of fear and adrenaline tightening in my chest. Ready? I didn't feel ready. I didn't think anyone could be ready for what was coming. He began explaining what had changed. There had been a leak. Someone had discovered our operation, and they were coming for the information, for us. The danger was immediate, unavoidable. I felt my throat dry, my hands shaking, as the weight of reality pressed down on me. Everything we had uncovered, everything we were trying to protect, was now at risk. My mind raced, trying to process it all, trying to figure out a way to stay one step ahead, and yet part of me wanted to scream and run. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had already committed myself to this story, and turning back was no longer an option. As we strategized, the first sign of intrusion appeared, a sudden noise outside the door, sharp and deliberate. My heart skipped, fear ripping through me. He motioned for me to hide, and I crouched behind a stack of crates, the shadows wrapping around me like a cloak. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the shuffle of footsteps, made my stomach twist. And then they appeared. Two figures, moving with purpose, their eyes scanning the room. They spoke no words, but their presence was a warning, a silent threat that left no room for error. I gripped the edge of the crat, nails biting into my palms, and tried to make myself invisible, to disappear into the shadows. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My mind spun, heart pounding so hard I thought it would break through my chest. Every instinct told me to run, to do something, anything, but my body refused. Fear had rooted me in place, sharp and unrelenting. I could hear his breath beside me, steady, controlled, a stark contrast to the chaos I felt inside. And yet, even in that moment of terror, I felt a strange clarity. I realized this was what it meant to be part of this story, to confront danger, to feel alive in a way I had never experienced, to understand that every choice carried weight beyond imagination. Finally, the intruders left, their footsteps fading into the distance. We exhaled, tension easing just enough for me to realize how close we had come to disaster. He turned to me, eyes intense, voice low. "Do you see now? Every step matters. Every action has consequences. You can't take this lightly." I nodded, my throat tight, realizing that I had already crossed the line into a world I could never leave. Fear and adrenaline still coursed through me, but beneath it, determination burned. A fire that told me I would face whatever came next, no matter the cost. We moved back into the city, keeping to the shadows, every corner, every alley feeling alive with potential danger. My mind raced with possibilities, consequences, and questions I couldn't answer. Yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, I felt an undeniable sense of purpose. I was part of something bigger than myself, something that demanded courage, focus, and resilience. I realized that running away was no longer an option. I couldn't undo what had begun. The story had me now, and I had to see it through. When we finally paused at a quiet street corner, he turned to me, eyes meeting mine with a look I couldn't do.
Decipher. Warning? Trust? Both? "Tomorrow," he said, voice soft but firm. "Everything changes. You need to be ready for what comes next."
I nodded, words failing me, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And as I walked back to my apartment, the streets empty and cold around me, I felt a strange mixture of fear, exhilaration, and anticipation. I had already stepped too far into this story to turn back, and deep inside, I knew that the climax, the moment that would define everything, was just around the corner. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every shadow in my room feeling like it was moving, every sound amplified. I thought about the danger, the secrets, the trust I had placed in him, and the choices I had made. And I realized, with a weight that pressed down on my chest, that nothing would ever be the same. The ordinary life I had known was gone, replaced by a story that demanded courage, honesty, and fearlessness. And somewhere in the dark, I whispered to myself, "I am ready. Whatever comes next, I will face it. I have no choice but to face it."